She's an undergraduate law and her law degree, both from the University, Big Blue, the University of Michigan. No cheers. And she's been, after that, she got very actively involved with her children's educational systems and was involved with that. She's very active at Temple Bethel. And she's also did volunteer work for the New York CLU. And with further, it's my pleasure to introduce Nicole Sidman.
Thank you all. First of all, I just want to thank you all so much for having me here today, and more importantly than anything is just being engaged. I want to thank you all for caring as much as you do. I've seen your list of candidates that are coming, and I think there's just nothing more important than knowing who's running and really having those conversations. So that's what I want to do today. I want to have a conversation. I will tell you a little bit about me, and then I want to hear about you, what's on your mind, what you're thinking of, and what we can talk about. So as said, my name is Nicole Sidman. I am a first-time candidate. This is my first time running in this House seat, which is House District 105, but it's new for everybody. So it's a brand new seat, so I want to make sure that everyone sort of understands that there are going to be new candidates on your ballot. And the reason for that, as I've discussed with a few of y'all, is because of gerrymandering. So we are now in the most gerrymandered House district seat in Mecklenburg County, and most likely in the whole state, possibly in the country. And the reason for that is because of the person I'm running against. So I am running as a Democrat. I'm running against Tricia Cotham. She is currently serving in Mint Hill as a Republican. She ran as a Democrat in a very safe Democratic seat. After serving for 2 months, she flipped her party to Republican and now serves as a Republican. And because she couldn't win that seat again, they drew her a new seat. And so that's what this is now. So this now goes from parts of Mint Hill all the way through Matthews, around the Arboretum, and then you'll go down Ray Road or down 51 up to Colony and Carmel area. So that's your new district. I believe firmly that voters should pick the representatives. Representatives should not pick their voters. So one of the things I'm running on is to make sure that we can stop this kind of gerrymandering so that you aren't meeting a new representative every 2 years. Y'all should know me. You should know me, I should know you. And in 6 years, I should still be representing you and knowing you, and you should know me. Because that's how relationships are formed, regardless of party, and that's how things actually get done. So, as indicated, I was a lawyer for about a decade. I worked in mostly real estate law, commercial real estate law, and banking after I decided that that was not really that much fun. I stayed home with my kids. I was a PTA president, a volunteer in the public schools. I worked in the preschools for a couple of years as a volunteer. Really enjoyed that work. And when I moved here to Charlotte, I got involved in politics. And one of the things we were talking about is how easy it is to get involved in politics in Charlotte and how fun that is, that you can really know your people. I'd never met a congressperson, I'd never met anybody until I moved here and started to really get involved. So I ran a campaign for a House seat up in House District 98, which is in Davidson, Huntersville, and Cornelius. So we flipped that seat and broke the supermajority. And that supermajority was broken, meaning that the Democrats and the Republicans had to compromise to a bill that the now Democratic governor would sign. Once you have a supermajority, they don't need the governor's signature because they can override his veto. So now when you have a supermajority, it means Republicans can do whatever they want. Whichever party has a supermajority, in this case it's the Republicans, can do whatever they want. They don't need to talk to the Democrats, and they don't need to respect the elected governor's veto. To me, that's not what democracy is. So we had broken that supermajority until Tricia Cotham flipped her seat. So when she flipped that seat, she gave the Republicans back their supermajority. And that really brought me back into politics. Before that, after running a successful race, I've worked in the community. That's really my passion, is community service and working within the community, making connections between, I would say, finding the people who need something and finding the people who have something. And when you can make that connection, it's magic. And that's really what I do at Temple Bethel. My current role is the Director of Congregational Life. I work there full-time, helping to serve our congregants and also the greater community. So we have worked very closely with with refugee centers, bringing in refugees and setting up apartments and homes and doing drives. We do something called Abraham's Tent, where every year we house the unhoused for a night, for a series of Saturday nights. It's really beautiful. They wake up, they have breakfast, they can, we send them with lunch. It's just a night of safety and showers and all the things that they don't get. We do, drives we work with a Title I school with Sterling Elementary. We do a lot of work with them. It's just a real joy to serve this community. And what I found is that it was getting harder and harder to serve the community because the money wasn't there, because the efforts weren't there, because what was happening in Raleigh was really stripping a lot of our people of what they needed in Mecklenburg County specifically. So those are some of the reasons that I get excited to run. Those are some of the things that really fill me up with joy, is those kind of relationships, relationship building. There's a lot of people in here who I've known for years or just for a few months, but just seeing those faces and knowing that they're excited to work on a particular project or in service, it really is something that is very meaningful to me. So in addition to gerrymandering, I'll tell you a few things that I feel very strongly about. I feel very strongly about our public schools. I am a product of public schools, and I believe that public schools should be fully funded. We need to pay our teachers more. I was a teacher, and I do know for a fact that the single biggest indicator of whether you have longevity of teachers staying is teacher pay. It makes sense. That's why we all go to work. I mean, you hope to love your job and you hope to be inspired by it, but it is a job, and if we're not paying people to do their job, they'll find a different job. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing so much attrition, and when you don't have teachers with experience, you lose all of that knowledge and you lose all of that experience. And so I really want to focus on getting our kids the education they deserve. Healthcare is a giant issue, has been a giant issue for the state of North Carolina. We finally have gotten to expand Medicaid, but now we're seeing all of these attacks on healthcare. So I do want to stem those attacks on healthcare, make sure that people are able to get the care they need, make it affordable, and make sure it's accessible, and that we are a safe place for everybody to live. Those are sort of my, in a quick nutshell. There's a whole lot of other things I can talk about, but I really want to hear from y'all first. If you have any questions or anything specific that you want to know my view on, I'd be happy to do that. Yes.
Housing. I agree with what you said about teacher pay.
Mm-hmm.
And our housing has just, gone astronomical.
Yes.
How can we attract teachers even if we get the pay up a bit? Because they can't afford a house. They
Yes.
can't afford even apartments.
Yes, that is a great question. Housing is a huge issue for everybody. And one of the things that we see when we're looking at these jobs that, we're trying to talk about, how can people live here if they can't pay for it? So there's not as much as I wish there was that we could do about housing in Raleigh, but there's a few things we can do, and those are the things that I stand for. So one thing is affordable housing. So making sure that people cannot discriminate against people who are looking for affordable housing. And that when people want to build these large apartments, that we see them charging astronomical rent, not just that they set aside some for affordability, because they're getting their tax breaks for that then they are required to keep those. So what we see is a lot of times they'll set aside some for affordable housing for a few years, and then they attrition out. So then we lose that affordable housing. So that's one thing that I feel very strongly about, is that we should make sure that we are building housing that people can afford. We also have to look, we all will talk about, how much addition can these areas take? How many more cars can the Matthews hold? And so one of the big problems with that is our issues with public transportation. So I believe strongly that one thing we need is good public transportation, including in Matthews, that then makes different areas of housing more accessible. So you don't have to think, okay, well, this is gonna be a 3-hour car ride because of all the traffic, but instead, here are some points, and we've seen that work in South End. We've seen it work, but we're not seeing it out here. We're not seeing it in Matthews, we're not seeing it in South Charlotte, and we're not seeing it in Mid Hill. So I think that can really help as well, because it expands the areas where we can have people live and also not put the whole burden on the infrastructure that we're seeing with the increased traffic that I know we all experience. I'm famously 15 minutes late to everything now because I always underestimate how much traffic's gonna be on Providence Road. So, I mean, those sorts of things that we can do. The other thing, and this will be a very common theme you'll hear from me because I hear it from my counterparts in Mecklenburg County. We need to make sure that Raleigh, the people in Raleigh, when I say Raleigh, I mean the legislature who's doing the budget, is giving the money to Mecklenburg County that they need so that the county is not having to use their own funds for things that should be state paid for. And one of those is roads, for example. And schools and law enforcement and district attorneys. So we're talking about crime, we're talking about education, and we're talking about infrastructure. When they don't provide Mecklenburg County with the money that they need, our county commissioners have to find it somewhere else. And then it's coming out of something. So if we can get the state to pay for what they should pay for, we have a lot more accessibility to funds so that we can help with things like looking at some better solutions for housing and looking at solutions for transportation, because the two are really interwoven.
I don't know if you're taking questions now,
I am.
but in the transportation situation, I think it was a few months ago, we heard that they canceled light rail that goes into Matthews, Mint Hill, that type of thing, which is now exploding in construction and homes and apartments and things like that, which makes Mint Hill difficult traveling around it as well, not just Matthews.
Yep.
What's happening with that light rail?
Thank you for asking that, because that is an evolving situation. And what happened there is really exactly what I'm talking about the state trying to tell the county how to operate. And I have a real problem with that, because I think that, we have a very diverse state. We have 100 counties. So we have to trust that our counties know what they're doing. And so in this case, for example, we had a plan, and that plan included a light rail to Matthews that people in Matthews counted on.
Yeah,
When they were looking at where to live, where to build, where to open businesses, they counted on that light rail being there. Well, for reasons that we are not entirely sure, people in Raleigh decided, no, we're not gonna give you that much money for light rail. You have to use it on roads. So they designated, we'll give you X amount of money, but now 40% has to be for roads. And then the money that was gonna go for light rail now is for a bus system.
Yeah.
And for anybody who's ever been stuck behind a bus, or stuck waiting for a bus, or in the rain or the snow, we know that buses are great for a secondary transportation. They're important. We should have better bus systems in Charlotte, absolutely, but they're not a replacement for a true rail system. And that's what was promised. And when everybody got behind closed doors, a deal was made that just cut Matthews out. And this deal was made in Raleigh, not here. And so now we're at a place where we have to decide whether we want perfect to be the enemy of good. Do we want to say, okay, at least we get the light rail for North Mecklenburg County, which is so important, but then at what cost? Or do we hold off and say no? Because if we don't do it now, it's a 100-year plan. So if we don't do it now, it's hard to imagine a time where the money and the will be there. So it's a very complicated issue. It's not anything that will be on your ballot this election, but it's something that you're gonna hear a lot about in the next election cycle. And the question is, who is engaged in this? Who's having the conversations? I've been attending the Matthews City Council meetings. Who's having the conversations with the leaders of Matthews and understanding what they think? And who's willing to have the conversations about what we can do to have solutions? Any other questions? Yeah.
Is there anything you can do on a state level to try and control the cost of medications and medicine and medical things in general?
Yes. What a great and important question. So what we saw was, for a very long time, the Republican-led legislature refusing to expand Medicaid, which absolutely gave Big Pharma a opportunity to continue to jack up prices here, and absolutely made it harder for people to receive medication. So one of the things we can do is continue that expansion. So that will allow people to have access to health care, that will give more competition and state funding of those services. Now, in the broader sense of, the true explosion that of prices that we've all seen, we've all experienced, that is more of a federal issue, so there's not a ton we can do at the state level, but things like tax credits and just making sure that we are expanding as much as we can and not limiting people's access, I think is a really important thing. And then the other thing is access to not just affordable medicine, but good doctors. And I think, I don't mean to speak for everybody in this room, but I'll speak for myself, that I've certainly had the occasion where I need a doctor and they're like, great, we'll see you in a month. And you don't have a month. So those kind of shortages, and because we're seeing doctors leave the profession because of all of these different insurance costs and things, is something that we really need to look at. And one of the things we're seeing is that now with all of these new laws like SB 20, which is limiting access to reproductive care, we're seeing doctors question whether or not they want to come here. Because they say, well, I'm not sure what's going to happen from a cultural standpoint in this state, and if you're going to limit my ability to practice my medicine the way I see fit, if I'm going to literally be at risk for being, put in jail for trying to save a patient, that's not a state I'm gonna go to. So we are also really have to look at what we're hearing doctors say about practicing here and whether they want to come here. Because if doctors are scared to come here, or if they leave, we are going to have a much harder time accessing the healthcare we need. And I think it's already pretty difficult as is. Yeah.
This may be related, I don't know. So in North Carolina, the governor and the lieutenant governor can be of different parties. Why did we get that, and what can we do to eliminate that? This is stupid.
So North Carolina is funky in a lot of ways, and that's one of them. So what you'll hear a lot about, the state, a lot of people who are the Council of State. And so there's a lot of people that we elect that most states don't elect. So that's a weird thing in and of itself. Things like the insurance commissioner, these very specialized things. That in particular are two different ballots. So they don't run together, they don't run as a ticket. Currently we have a governor and a lieutenant governor who are very misaligned. And so I think that the problem is because of the limitations that we as North Carolinians have to get things on the ballot. We do not have a way to get items on the ballot. It would need to be done at the legislative level. I think it's in the Constitution, so that we would need to do a constitutional amendment, which we as voters cannot do. You have seen in other states ballot initiatives. We don't have the ability to do ballot initiatives because of the many different ways that the North Carolina Constitution sets up things. Another thing I would mention about that is to look closely at what our legislation is doing about limiting the power of the governor, because the parties are not aligned. And we saw that when they lost the supermajority the first time, while they had a brief period of time, they passed a number of bills that took away some of the powers of the governor. I think Wisconsin really set that stage in 2016, I think it was, on how to strip the power away from a governor that you don't agree with. So we've seen a lot of that in North Carolina too. So, but unfortunately, as of now, the governor and the lieutenant governor will continue to run on different ballots. And I think the thing to say is everyone has to pay attention to that, because who was paying attention? I mean, who is running for lieutenant governor? Did you know we had a lieutenant governor? Did you know who was running for lieutenant governor 2 years ago? These are not things that people are really focused on, even that they're of different parties. A lot of people think, I know who I'm gonna vote for governor, so it'll all flow down. And that's why these conversations are so important, because I think a lot of people really have told this particular set of governor and lieutenant governor, nobody really noticed. And now people are like, well, that is really something. So I think the other issue is to just really be paying attention to who's on our ballots. Yeah.
I was looking over my mail and
I'm gonna bring this over to you.
I was looking over my mail-in ballot, which I deliver personally to be sure it gets there. But it gives me a chance to look over all the candidates with quite a microscope. But at the end, there was a crazy constitutional amendment, and I really don't know how to respond because I thought it was already in our Constitution.
You're very smart, it is. So this is where I'm gonna put my lawyer hat on. I am not a big fan of amending constitutions unless it's to make something constitutional. So the idea of the Constitution is to grant the rights to people of what they can do. If it doesn't need to be in the Constitution, or if it's already in the Constitution, it doesn't need to be voted on. So this constitutional amendment, to be clear, non-citizens cannot vote in this country. And let me just, does everyone know what the constitutional amendment is before I?
Yeah.
So let me just say this. So it is a if the text on here, so.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So basically, it's a constitutional amendment that you look at it and you think, okay, that's fine. So it's talking about not giving non-citizens the right to vote. And you look at that and you could think two things. Like one, sure, people who aren't citizens of this country shouldn't vote, so I'll vote yes. Or, wait, they already can't vote, why is this in there? What are they trying to do? And so there's a couple things that is intended to do. One is, I'll tell you, I'm knocking doors a lot. And I'm asking people what they care about. And I'm hearing a lot of things, but one of the things I'm hearing a lot about is immigration. Now, I don't know if y'all have looked around, but we are not on a border. But they have, but the story is to really just have this fear of people who are coming and illegally voting and are coming for illicit purposes. Now, my mother is first generation American. I am the child of immigrants. At the end of the day, all of us in America are the child of immigrants in some way. But my grandfather came here with $7 in his pocket. So, didn't speak a word of English and built a life. And here I am, 2 generations later. So I believe deeply that this is a country that was built on welcoming the stranger, embracing people as they come in. I do not believe that we have anything to fear. And the other thing that I know we don't have anything to fear of is voter fraud from illegal immigrants. And the reason why I know that is because the study after study after study shows that. It's not a real issue. It is meant to scare people. And so what this is supposed to do is bring out those people who might not otherwise want to vote or might not be interested because they see that on the ballot and they say, oh yeah, I've got to make sure that the illegal immigrant doesn't vote. So that's one reason why it's on there. It brings people out to vote. And this is very common. Every 2 years, you'll see whatever the issue of the day is, put it on. The other reason is because it is vaguely written and not clear. So there is some concern that it could then be used later on to also prohibit the vote of naturalized citizens. Naturalized citizens, people like my grandfather, the most patriotic man I knew, who came here, became a citizen. And so the wording is intentionally vague. We've seen that courts can do a lot with a little. And so from my perspective, we already know that people who are not citizens of the United States cannot vote, so it is just not necessary, and it could actually be harmful. So that's my personal take on it.
So vote no?
I personally, yes, I would say vote no. Yes, vote no. I think that most immigrant communities look at that as sort of another way to keep them from voting. And remember that the majority of immigrants who come here legally and safely and are patriots and fight in the army and pay taxes and should not be villainized.
Is this a precursor to the removal of birthright citizenship?
I think they would love, this question was if this is a precursor to birthright citizenship. I think that that is something, I mean, that's in the Constitution, so it would be real hard, I mean, for them to, the United States Constitution, not the North Carolina. So, but there's been talk of it, and that's shocking that anyone would even, the fact that we're asking this question tells us how dangerous this movement is. So yes, if you're born in this country, you are a citizen. The Constitution says that. That means that there was an intentionality by those that wrote the Constitution to have that be true, without carve-outs and exceptions. And so I think that there is an eye towards if there's a way to start chipping away at that. Anything else? Any other questions? Yeah.
Why are there only Democrats running for judgeships?
So that goes back to a little bit of what we were talking about with the gerrymandering. So what happens is, and you'll see, your ballot does not have this, but,
Could you repeat the question?
oh yeah, I'm sorry. The question is why, she's looking at the judges and saying there's only Democrats there. I would take that back one more question and say, why do we know the political parties of our judges in the first place? Which we didn't for decades. And the reason for that is that the Republican legislature changed the way we do voting. So first of all, the law doesn't have a political party. So, but because now we have it that way, the districts, the way they're drawn, people look at it and think, can I win or not win? And if they don't think they can win, they don't run. So people have looked at those particular districts and said, those are not districts, the judge districts, those are not districts I can win. So I'm not going to run in there for Republicans. And so then we really lose out on conversations. We lose out on different ideas. We lose out on voters who might be drawn to vote for one side or the other. You will see that, for example, Supreme Court, which again is party line, we do have both a Republican and a Democrat running for Supreme Court. So it just depends on where the lines are drawn for a particular race. But for example, I think we have, I'm running for the House district, which means I would be in the North Carolina House. I think we have at least 5 that I can think of candidates who are Democrats that don't have an opponent because of the way these are drawn. And the main reason of that is because of the way my particular district is drawn, that they drew it in such a way that there were so many safe races around the county to try to save this one seat for Tricia Calhoun.
What percentage of the registered voters in this district are independents?
It's a great question. What percentage of registered voters in this district are independent? So generally what we see in Mecklenburg County is it's basically about a third, a third, a third. So third Republicans, third Democrats, third independent. This district leans a little bit more towards Republican and independent. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but Anna might.
40% independent, 30 and 30.
40% independent, and then about 30 and 30 Republican. And so those have been the most interesting. You know, we will knock just about anyone's door because I'm willing to have a conversation. And what we have found with the independents in particular is really a feeling of you know, this conversation about what does politics look like now, and we've been talking about that. People being afraid to talk about politics, people being afraid to talk to their neighbors, people being afraid to just have these conversations. And so the independents in particular who are, you know, really willing to have these conversations on both sides are really excited to, you know, just sort of talk about their issues. And, you know, and I said this to someone the other day, I said, you might not agree with everything I have to say, but you will agree that I'm the person who came to your door. So that's, you know, that's sort of how I run this race is, you know, I'm the person who's gonna come to this room and come back to this room and come back to this room, because I think that those conversations are so important. But we need, you know, independent voters, we need them to come out and vote, because they're the majority in this district.
How much money does the state really owe the people in this disaster area? Is it all FEMA? and charitable organizations, and if you give the money there, then you don't have it for all these other programs that you're talking about.
So the question was about money towards Western North Carolina. And I will be honest, I do not know how that state money is being spent versus the FEMA. I mean, I know that there is not separate buckets of money. So, I mean, there is separate buckets of money. So if you're paying to help in Western North Carolina, it does not now mean we won't have money for schools. Or we now have spent the money for this. And that there is money particularly for these matters, same with FEMA. FEMA is obviously funded through the federal government, but it's funded. You can also, though, look and see who's voted in the legislature to increase spending for FEMA for our natural disasters, because the way that money gets spent is decided in the budget. So the budget is set, and that's how it gets spent up. I don't know the numbers, though, about exactly how it's being divided up or anything like that.
What have you done to get the younger generation involved in politics and voting now with the way the current situation is in the world?
Do you know what's so interesting? I keep hearing that young people aren't engaged, but like, I see so many young people engaged, including my incredibly young campaign manager. But we've got a group called the MECDEM Teens, and they're all high school students, and they're out all the time. They're canvassing with us, they're at events. We've had an internship program led by Anna, where we have, I think it was like 6 to 8 young college and high school students who spent all summer not just helping on the campaign, but being trained about why these things matter and how to win and what you need to do and how to have hard conversations. And so when we talk to them and then we talk about them going back to their schools and having those conversations. So we have seen, for example, now there is a Myers Park Democratic Party team, like the Myers Park High School, and one at Ardrey Cal. So they're really starting to be engaged. And I will tell you that the kids I talk to, especially the girls, they're already engaged because they know what's at stake and they're terrified. So I don't think we got to do anything to get them engaged. I think we just need to help them and support them. And for those that can't vote but are having their rights taken away, we've got to vote for them.
Thank you.
All right, is there anything else? So I will just tell you all, first of all, I'm so glad to see that you have all of that information there. Voting, early voting starts a week from Thursday. And early voting is the best way to vote because there are no lines and you can go in and go out and it's fast and it's easy. And so I highly recommend doing that. There's a list of where you can early vote and there's a list of the times, and they're open on weekends and evenings. So that's what I recommend, just because that way you're guaranteed to kind of get in and get out. And also, I will make sure, there's lots of people here who know how to contact me, but if you have any other questions or want to follow up with
You
anything.
mentioned the girls in high schools is the main issue for them, the abortion issue?
Yes, abortion and access to birth control.
The environment.
And yeah, I mean, the main issue, when I'm talking about that specific, I mean, girls are not a monolith. Many of what I was referring to there is that, but they also care deeply about their schools. They're the ones who are sitting in schools without teachers. There's the ones who are sitting in overcrowded classrooms, so they care deeply about that. They're the ones who can't get the classes they need, that they want for their college applications, and they care deeply about the environment and what we are leaving them with. So I did not mean to indicate they are on one issue, but right now they're scared about one particular issue. Yeah, no.
It sounds like you're ending the presentation here, and I just wanted to compliment you on your presentation. It was very clear, precise, and understandable, and it was like, okay, yeah, I understand this issue better, so thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We want to thank Nicole for sharing her thoughts with us, and thank you for coming. Thank you very much.